So the Olmecs are perhaps Mesoamerica's strangest and most fascinating ancient culture. They seem to arrive on the historical timeline being almost a fully fledged and organized civilization, whose artwork and stonemasonry is completely fully formed at the very beginning of its civilization, or at least we don't have much of an archaeological record going back before the time of these gigantic colossal heads. And it's really not just the colossal heads. You have these enormous hexagonal column tombs that are being mined from basalt quarries over 100 kilometers away from their final site, and tons of other megalithic statues as well. We also don't even know what the Olmecs actually called themselves. We only get the name Olmecs or Olmecas from the Aztecs, referring to the people who were living in the Olmec area some 2,000 years later, and it means the rubber people, or people from the rubber region. And so if you've been following this channel for any period of time or seen me on any number of podcasts, you know I'm a huge fan of the Olmecs, and I'm actually working on a book, my first book, covering the Olmecs. And because of that, I get all kinds of recommendations from you guys as to videos that I should watch or react to, and this one in particular caught my attention, and it is Graham Hancock on the Joe Rogan Experience talking about the Olmecs. Now, to see someone with such a big name and such a famous person discussing the Olmecs on such a huge podcast is kind of a rarity. At least the Olmecs don't get that kind of spotlight. I mean, when's the last time you saw an Olmec head featured in a movie? Not very often, if ever. I mean, I don't think I can think of an example. So let's give this video a try, and I'm going to give you my thoughts throughout the course of the video.
Do you have anything in this book about the Olmecs?
No, not really. I mentioned them briefly. I explored the Olmec mystery in considerable depth.
Can you explain that to people that maybe
in Fingerprints of the Gods? Yes. So it's considered to be the earliest high culture of Central America. Everybody's heard about the Aztecs. Everybody's heard about the Maya. But before the Aztecs and before the Maya, there were a culture who are referred to as the Olmecs. Again, we don't know what they called themselves. That's what the Aztecs called them. They called them the Olmecs, and it means the rubber people because that rubber-producing area of Mexico. They worked in giant megalithic constructions. What they're most famous for is these huge carved human heads, which can be on a scale of up to 20 to 25 tons in weight, and which have curious features which have.
So one thing about this San Lorenzo head, this head right here is like the most iconic head from the Olmec world. When you walk around to the back side of that head, I was there just a couple of months ago. When you walk around to the back side of that head, there's actually a Mesoamerican or maybe even a Maya glyph on the backside. And you don't really see, at least, I don't know, people who actually research the Olmecs, you don't really see much in the way of Olmec writing or glyphs. There are some things that we think may be Olmec writing, but and I should preface that this head likely was carved and constructed around or erected around somewhere around 1400 to 1200 BC. So at that period, we see some things later on during the Epi-Olmec period, closer to about 300 BC, that may be Mesoamerican glyphs, but nothing as far back as 1300 BC, 1,000 years before. So on the backside of this head, there is what is very clearly a Maya-looking glyph, but thus far, people who translate Maya glyphs haven't been able to identify this. So it's either some kind of graffiti carving that perhaps a Maya person came later on and carved a glyph into it, or this is a heavily overlooked Olmec glyph on the back of San Lorenzo's most iconic Olmec head.
Been interpreted variously as Polynesian, African, don't look like classic Native American features.
Keep that up.
But one of the things I've realized is that there is no classic Native American feature. That Native Americans are have a very complex genetic story with very many different.
That's so true. So when Graham Hancock wrote Fingerprints of the Gods, which I read, I don't know, 10 years ago, and I read it again more recently, probably about 4 years ago, he theorizes that the Olmec heads have some African features and that they look so much different than the rest of the depictions that we see of Native Americans. But then he says here, I mean, and this is years later after more research has come out, then he says here that what he's learned is that there's a wide plethora, or there's a wide range of what Native Americans look like. And I would actually even get more specific than that. There is a wide range of what Mexicans look like, or people who lived in Mesoamerica. When you're at Mexico City's National Museum of Anthropology, and you go to the Western Mexico section, you see people with high cheekbones, pointed chins, and almost diamond-shaped, very angular jawlines, and they all look like that. Then you go to the Maya region, and you see people who look kind of a bit more like me, like long faces, sort of a long nose, I don't know, high cheekbones. I sort of look like a Maya person. I have a little bit of Yucatec in me, and you can sort of see it in my features from certain angles. But then in the Olmec world, you see people with kind of chubby, fat, round faces with big nose and big lips, and these are commonly interpreted, or at least people like to see them as being African features. But that's not true at all. People in Veracruz, or I should say indigenous people in Veracruz, don't look like indigenous people that live in the Maya region. They don't look like people who live in Western Mexico. They have their own unique look. And that was never more clear to me than when we walked through the door of the Jalapa Museum, and there was a man there from Veracruz who was he was way over 6 feet tall, but he had a big round face with big lips, a big nose, and he looked exactly like an Olmec head. And I opened the door and I was like, oh, wow, there's an Olmec standing right in front of me. So not only do Native Americans look vastly different as you travel across, I mean, it's obvious that they would look vastly different. They cover one half of the planet. So at least, during the time of pre-Columbus, of course they didn't all look the same. They cover half the planet. It's not like, you wouldn't think that people living on the other half, on the eastern half of the planet, all look the same. So all Native Americans look different, and not only Native Americans, but ancient Mexicans as well, or even people from ancient Mesoamerica.
And we shouldn't be necessarily surprised by the supposedly non-Native American look of these Olmec heads.
What do we think those helmets were that they were wearing?
Nobody knows, because no physical example of such a helmet has ever been found, just like no physical example of an Egyptian pharaoh's crown has ever been found. All we see is the...
Another thing is so the Olmecs, we think, invented the Mesoamerican ball game. And I won't explain the whole ball game, but there's tons of videos that you can go watch and then come back and pick up. These Olmec heads, the helmets that they're wearing, they've never been found. Just like Egyptian headdresses, they've never been found. But the helmets may represent something that very early ball players would have worn. We don't really see these helmets depicted really anywhere else in Mesoamerica, as far as I know.
All we see is the stone reproductions of them.
Do they universally wear these helmets in these stone reproductions?
They pretty much all wear these helmets.
This head is in the Jalapa Museum, I believe, and wow, standing in front of it in person is overwhelming. This is probably the smoothest, most beautiful Olmec head of all of them, I would say.
Helmets in the Olmec stonework. There's another fascinating figure from La Venta, one of the Olmec sites, which is the earliest ever image of a plumed or feathered serpent. The feathered serpent is a famous icon in Central America. Quetzalcoatl, who's the god of peace, the bringer of civilization, who is associated, for example, with the famous pyramid of Kukulkan, which is just another name for Quetzalcoatl at Chichen Itza, where on the spring equinox a shadow effect creates the image of a serpent coiling down the stairway and joining with the carved head of the serpent. There's the image from...
Yeah, so I went and saw this for the first time with NEXT just a couple months ago after I did my Olmec expedition, and it was pretty amazing. So on the spring equinox, the sun is setting in just the right way that a shadow is cast from the corner of the step pyramid, and the shadow that's being cast onto the railway of the stairway going down, it looks like a serpent undulating down the pyramid, and it connects with the serpent head at the bottom. Now, a lot of archaeologists think that this is just an accident and that this was bound to happen if you constructed a pyramid just like this. And it doesn't actually just happen on one day. It happens, I think, over the course of a week or 2 weeks. But when you're there, the environment that's there, and there's thousands of people all cheering when you can see the shadow being projected onto the side of the pyramid, and it looks like the serpent is going down the pyramid. I don't know. It feels intentional to me, but many archaeologists think that this may just be an accident of some kind, that the Maya didn't actually intend for this to happen on purpose. But then again, the Maya were the ancient world's greatest astronomers, and if anybody could do this on purpose, it was absolutely them.
That's the earliest image of a plumed serpent in the Americas. And sitting in the middle of it, and I made a big deal out of this because I think it is a big deal in Magicians of the Gods, sitting in the middle of it is this human figure who's holding this strange bag in his hand. And it's just a fact that those identical bags are found in ancient Sumer.
So I don't mean to cut him off about the handbag thing, but one thing I want to point out that I've always thought was amazing is look at the aesthetics of the head of that plumed serpent. Now, I don't know. It's hard to say that this is a plumed serpent or a feathered serpent for sure. I mean, it looks like it, and obviously it's similar iconography, and it's also in Mesoamerica, so it seems at the very least likely that this is the first depiction of the feathered serpent. But you can see on his tail, he also has a rattle. And so he's some kind of feathered serpent or dragon with a rattlesnake tail. But if you look at how well it's carved and the aesthetics of it and the proportions, you wonder how many generations does it take for artisans to become that good, and how much lost artwork must there be? Because like I said before, the Olmecs seem to be a fully fledged and fully realized civilization from the beginning of their archaeological record. They are making monuments like this from the very beginning, according to the archaeology that we have. And they're carving it into basalt as well, which is an extremely hard stone. So let's continue.
In the hands of individuals who were considered to be civilization bringers. And they also show up on Pillar 43 at Göbekli Tepe. I call them man bags. And in that case, at Göbekli Tepe, we know they're at least 11,600 years old. So I wonder if we're looking at a sort of badge of office of a group of civilizers who traveled around the world trying to bring back to life a lost...
So they kind of jump through that, where he talks about, he wonders if there's a badge of office of a lost civilization going around the world and bringing some kind of knowledge. It's a big claim, and it's possible to prove, but really difficult to prove as well. And the problem is, okay, so Göbekli Tepe, I think, is right after or right in the middle of this cataclysm, and we may see handbags there as well. We also see them in ancient Mesopotamia, which is some 2,000 to 3,000 years before the time of the Olmecs. We also see these handbags in classic Veracruz, which is around 900 AD. If there's this lost civilization going around and bringing knowledge to people, that must mean that they exist during the time of about, let's call it 1500 BC, when Olmec civilization really begins. So this lost civilization that's moving around bringing knowledge of civilization to different corners of the earth, that means they were doing that contemporaneously with the Middle Kingdom and New Kingdom of ancient Egypt, which, I don't know, seems to go against the whole Atlantis idea, because civilization had already kicked off in other areas of the world by then. I mean, I suppose there's an argument that still makes sense, but the civilization bringers, where do they go after 1500 BC? So it's tough to explain these things, although when you look at that monument 19 where he's holding that handbag while being carried inside what is possibly some kind of flying serpent, what do you make of that? And then you see those same kind of handbags in the ancient Middle East, and maybe we see it depicted on Göbekli Tepe, although it's quite different, and I don't think anybody's holding those. What is somebody supposed to make of these monuments? I honestly have no idea. There could be a psychedelic answer of some kind. Perhaps, I mean, we know for a fact that ancient cultures are delving into primitive psychedelics, or I mean, I call them primitive, but they could have been extremely advanced. These guys could have been a great chemist and botanist. Research is just now showing the depth at which the ancient Greek civilization was experimenting with psychedelics, although we've known that for a long time, as well as the Romans, the Egyptians. We know that ancient Americans were doing this too. We know the Aztecs were doing it. Perhaps rather than there being a physical badge of office traveling around the world. Perhaps these ancient civilizations are all tapping into a similar source and somehow having similar epiphanies and seeing similar iconography and producing similar images. I mean, we see ancient patterns. You can look up Greek and Mesoamerican meandering patterns that are basically exactly identical, being produced in ancient Greece, the ancient Maya world, ancient Peru, the Zapotec civilization, the Aztec civilization. You can see it in North America in Chaco Canyon. You can see it in ancient Florida. You can see it in the Mississippian cultures. There's some kind of connection here. And maybe it's not a connection between cultures, but perhaps it's more of a connection where all of these civilizations are tapping into a similar source and then producing similar iconography because of that. Maybe that's an explanation.
Did you talk about Quetzalcoatl? What were you about to say?
I can't remember.
Oh.
I'm in California. I've been smoking lots of dope. You know?
We were talking about different things in the Amazon. Should we rewind and figure out what we
Yeah,
said?
the serpent god you were talking about.
Before Quetzalcoatl, before that. I have another question. The Olmecs, you were talking about the genetics of these people that live in Native Americans, that they vary widely. But the Olmecs seem to have very similar features, the thick lips, the
Yes, they
wide
do.
noses. Why do we think that is?
Well, this is part of a curious mystery that is not unconnected to the genetic mystery. It's been known by archaeologists for quite a long time that there are anomalous skulls in parts of Brazil, which appear to show very strongly Polynesian or African features, very much like the features that we see on the Olmec heads. And a number of archaeologists who got into trouble with their colleagues for this have used that to argue many years ago, 30, 40 years ago, that the settlement story of the Americas is much more complicated than we've realized. And what the DNA is doing is it's telling us that.
Yeah, I mean, the story of people migrating to the Americas is probably going to be forever evolving, because I think that people were constantly finding some way to be here. I mean, they thought that civilization in the Americas wasn't really kicking off until maybe 1500 BC during the time of the Olmecs, and that people weren't arriving in South America until, I don't know, around 10,000 years ago. But now we're finding evidence of 30,000-year-old campsites in southeastern Brazil, I believe, near the coast. And so how do you make that jump all the way from crossing over from Asia down into Alaska, North America, to the southeast side of Brazil in the Amazon? I don't know. But one of the things that I'm writing about right now is I'm researching ancient Olmec rafts. And while I'm researching that, I'm also researching ancient Colombian, Ecuadorian, and Peruvian balsa rafts that the Spanish navigators encountered leading into Pizarro's expeditions into South America. An archaeologist in the 1940s, I think this is 1947, named Thor Heyerdahl, he theorized that these river rafts were a lot more robust and well constructed than archaeologists had currently thought. And so he was so determined to prove that these rafts were not as primitive as previously thought. He thought that he may be able to prove that these indigenous rafts could potentially travel across the entire Pacific Ocean, that ancient people could navigate deep into the ocean, which, you know, we had thought that they were restricted to the coastlines and tributaries going inland. But in 1947, he launches an expedition to sail from Peru into French Polynesia, which is in the center of the Pacific Ocean, on a small raft that he named Kontiki. And it took him like 110 days or 111 days, and he finally made it to French Polynesia and proved that it was possible to sail across the entire Pacific Ocean on these ancient indigenous rafts. So if he was able to figure that out, there were certainly ancient Native Americans that probably did the same thing to some extent. And also, I should add vice versa, that people were coming from Polynesia, sailing across the Pacific Ocean, landing on Easter Island, and then sailing further into Peru, as well as all over the rest of the ancient world. So if that can be proven, it just opens up Pandora's box to the possibilities of well, now we know that people weren't just coming across the Bering Strait, that they may have been migrating from all over the world.
It's telling us that there was something really weird happened with settlement. You see, what happened with those African or Polynesian-looking skulls was that they were tested for DNA when DNA technology was not as advanced as it is today. And what that DNA showed was that they were more closely related to modern Native Americans than they are to any other people in the world. So the notion that there was some connection with Polynesia or Africa was dismissed. But now that we have very firm evidence of an Australasian genetic signal, Australian Aborigines, Papua New Guinea, Melanesians, with those kind of features, now that we have the genetic evidence that is found in the Amazon, we have to go back to that old evidence and reconsider it.
Wow.
Yes. But I think that this is perhaps a slippery slope. Not that Graham is insinuating this. I'm just saying that running wild with these ideas that there is African DNA in the Amazon or DNA from dark-skinned people in Papua New Guinea, sure, that can be absolutely true. I don't think that we should then completely discredit ancient Americans for their feats, because I don't think that that is correct at all. I think there were probably navigators coming from other places in the world, let's say Papua New Guinea, Polynesia, Africa. Perhaps they were arriving in the Americas, let's say 1500 BC. Obviously, if they arrived, they must have been excellent oceanic navigators. That does not then mean that they were experts in large-scale agriculture and construction, architectural engineering. They could have just arrived and assimilated into a culture that was already doing that. And that's what I firmly believe was happening. I could always be wrong, but I think that the ancient Native Americans are responsible for the architecture that you see in the Americas.
Yeah, I would love to find out what that is. They've always fascinated me. The Olmecs, it's always been such a strange image, the large heads with the helmets on them, and how do they universally look like that? I mean, all
of the features are very, very similar.
Wow.
They're very, very, very similar.
And always with the helmets.
And almost always. I won't claim that every single Olmec head has a helmet of it, because I think I've seen one that didn't. It's quite a while ago since I...
Yeah, he would be correct about that. There's one, when you're looking at these helmets, they're 3,000, or when you're looking at these heads, they're 3,000 years old. It's not always easy to see the faded features that are on the heads, but there's one that looks like he has perhaps braided hair in the back, or it's some kind of dangling threads on the back of a helmet or some type of headdress. But yes, there may be one that doesn't have a helmet, but they all almost universally have helmets with all different designs on them. There's even one helmet that looks like it's completely made of cubes. I don't know how you explain that.
Since I explored the Olmec area. But what's fascinating about them is they are supposedly the first high civilization of Central America.
Not Central America, but Mexico, but that's not that big of a deal.
That you can see connections between them and the later Maya. That whole mystery of the Mayan calendar was clearly inherited from the Olmecs. It wasn't something the Maya made up. The Olmecs used that same symbolism. So
I could be wrong. I don't think they're using the same symbolism, but they're certainly keeping up with the same astronomical cycles, and they certainly are abiding, at least mentally, by the same calendar. And then the Maya sort of inherit that or grow up next to it.
The Olmecs may just be the latest, the earliest surviving manifestation of that calendar. It could go back much further than that.
Well, the idea that the Maya calendar goes back much further than the Olmecs is probably accurate if you're, again, just thinking about the fact that people are basing their entire lives on the cycle of the Maya calendar. Sure, I bet it goes back 10 to 20,000 years. It's not until the time of the Olmecs and definitely the Maya that this seems to be put on stone. Although that you see the Aztec solar disc a lot, and then you see the Maya calendar disc written in stone. That's actually not real. The Maya calendar stone does not actually exist. It's a fabrication that has become so popular that it's made its way to a point now where people think it actually exists, but it's just fake. It's just something that the Maya calendar is just something that the Maya people understood. It was like a part of speaking. It was their language. certain aspects of it were written in stone, but the actual calendar was not carved out in stone like we imagine it to be. All in all, I don't think Graham Hancock said anything bad or egregious or anything that people could consider to be pseudoscientific or disparaging to ancient American civilizations. So yeah, did a good job in this clip. And I love the Olmecs. I love to hear people talking about them. So if you guys see any podcasts where people are mentioning the Olmecs and you'd like me to watch it and give some of my thoughts on it, well, please leave a link in the comment section below. I'm working on a ton of new videos. I have a new Olmec video coming out next week, as well as a big Olmec announcement. So guys, keep your eyes peeled for that. And then of course, I have an Olmec book coming out. I'm not going to show you the cover or tell you the title of it yet. Although if you've really been paying attention on my social media or perhaps the podcast that I'm doing with Johanna called Raiders of the Past Podcast, you will have seen both the artwork and the title of the book. Also, I'm speaking at the Cosmic Summit on the weekend of June 14th through the 16th, I think, or 14th through the 17th. And I'm going to be talking about the mysteries of Mesoamerica, which is going to be including a lot about the Olmecs. So hope to see you there. Anyways, I'm Luke Caverns. If you'd like to learn more about ancient lost civilizations and ancient mysteries, ancient history, well, please like and subscribe for more. I'm trying to make the jump to doing this full time and can't do it without your support. So I'm Luke Caverns. We'll see you next time.